Well, good morning, everybody. And let me just say that if anyone has questions during the time that I'm speaking, feel free to ask. And of course, we're available for questions after as well. As Steve alluded to, 2009 was a pretty good year in comparison to 2008. One of the things that we're trying to do this year is take a look at the events that we know are coming in 2010 that may influence that housing market locally as well as nationally. One of the things, for example, that we know is going to happen is that as of April 30th, the tax credit that Steve alluded to, the $8,000 for first-time home buyers and $6,500 that's available for people that are trading up or trading down will no longer be available. One of the importance of that timeline is that you have to be in escrow on a home, have started the purchase process in essence, prior to April 30th, and you have until June 30th to close that transaction under those guidelines. But that is an $8,060 or $6,500 credit, depending on what type of buyer you are, that will no longer be available. And so we feel that that's something to watch in the months after that tax credit ends and just see how much or how many buyers that brought to our market. The other thing that's happening on a larger scale is that government-backed mortgage securities have been purchased by the government since November 2008. And they purchased them into the tune of $1.25 trillion as part of the stimulus package. That is slated to end at the end of the third quarter or the first quarter of this year. So as of March 31st, the government will no longer be doing that. That has been keeping interest rates for mortgages at a low level, somewhere between 4.5%, 4.75%, 4.875%, which has also helped buyers tremendously. When you balance that with the additional value of lower prices for homes, a tax credit that's available, and extremely low interest rates, it's made it a fantastic environment for buyers to purchase homes. That will continue at least through March. And then after that, again, we've got those two variables that are going to stop, and we'll see what happens with the housing market locally after that. However, one of the key factors is that with prices staying as low as they are, buyers who haven't found the property they're looking for will still be able to do that beyond those dates and get an incredible value that wasn't available 2, 3, 4, or 5 years ago in the Rogue Valley. So we certainly don't anticipate any major slump. There might be a slight dip in the April-May period as people get over the initial reduction of those programs, and then back to what we hope would be a more normalized market, and we'll see how it behaves without those two additional stimulus pieces. But values should still be inherently there for all buyers when they come to the marketplace. There's more information on that in your press package, by the way. It's always nice to see what the newspapers are saying, AP articles. We all read them, and everybody runs a story and sees what goes on nationally. Well, the National Association of Realtors just last week, the 25th, or this week, released statistics that said there was a 16.7% drop in existing home sales from November to December of last year. Now, they attributed that mainly to the fact that we anticipated the last tax credit to end at the end of November. We now know that was extended through April 30th. And so it was felt that that lull in December was mainly attributed to the fact that buyers anticipating that stop made their home purchases prior to November, so come December, the stimulus wasn't available to them, and so the housing stopped. An important factor for here in the Rogue Valley is that only 7.8% was the drop between November and December. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is you also have to remember that December is typically our slowest sales month anyway, as people take their houses off the market and buyers go back to living their normal lives through the holiday period, visiting with family, etc., etc. Not typically a month that's conducive to a lot of real estate sales, as you can imagine. The other reason, I believe, for the almost 9% difference between what happened here locally and nationally is that we've been doing a really good job here locally as a board of realtors and keeping informed on exactly these types of topics, keeping our finger on the pulse. We knew, we had rumors well in advance of the tax credit being extended that might indeed be the case. And while we never came out and said that it would be the case, because we can't make promises we don't control the end of, as soon as that was announced that tax credit continued and the additional tax credit was available to existing homeowners, we made sure our members knew of that immediately on that day. They received several emails, phone calls, and distribution of materials that showed them that. So there was less of a lull locally in terms of the information that was available to consumers because realtors were that well informed here locally. And so that's something we've been keeping a really close eye on, which is exactly why we're talking about these pieces here today. These are the things we'll be watching in March and April as we move through 2010 to see how it impacts our market. As Steve also mentioned earlier, we're still looking at distressed sales as being a big part of our marketplace. The good news, if you can call it that, is that where we had 52 to 54% of all of our sales earlier in 2009 being distressed sales, that's down about 10% by December. So we've seen a gradual decrease in the number of distressed sales as an overall percentage of how many homes are sold. So now finally, conventional sellers or non-distressed properties are starting to rise back up in the number of percentage sales that make up how many homes are being sold. Again, I would attribute that to a lot of good work being done by realtors. A lot of realtors are more skilled at closing short sales, and they're attending the classes, they're getting the information. It's a minefield out there for buyers and sellers to try and understand the complexities that are associated with purchasing either a short sale or a foreclosure or selling a short sale. And as we move through these tough times, we have more tools at our disposal to help them move through that, and we're getting that out there to the buyers and the sellers, and we're helping to sell the properties that were so much more difficult 2 years ago. So that's really helped us in 2009, and we look forward to helping us a lot more in 2010. Anyone have any questions at this point? Yes?
Experts say that there will be more foreclosed homes hitting the market in 2010 than 2009. You spoke quite a bit about those distressed properties and the knowledge behind selling those and what it takes. With even more choices on the market and higher options for those buyers, what challenges are there?
Well, it's interesting. That's certainly a national commentary, and while here locally we suffer from a lot of the foreclosure and distressed issues just as well as they do around the country, one of the reasons that those comments go out there is there are a lot of markets that you could look at that are leveraged differently in the way that the properties were financed. If you look at, and this information is available, about how different homes are financed and what is susceptible to being foreclosed upon or entering into a short sale situation, you'll find that the typical Oregonian didn't do as much of the financing with those types of loans that have caused a lot of these distressed sales. So you're still looking at large marketplaces in California, Nevada, the East Coast, and Florida, where there's a greater propensity for those to continue to come into the marketplace. And that's not to say that we will not see any more foreclosures here locally. I think Greg's newspaper, Mail Tribune, sees a lot of those notices go to the paper, and we keep a close eye on that too. So, but I don't think that we're as heavily affected as they might be in other parts of the nation. So locally, it's a more steady pace of foreclosures that come on the market. We're not overwhelmed by the number. It's more than we'd like it to be. But you hear things in Southern California and other parts of the nation where the banks own so many properties that they're holding back putting them on the market for fear of flooding their own market and being able to get less for the homes they need to foreclose on or try and sell once they are foreclosed on. Banks here typically, once they go through the foreclosure process, will put them on the market right away, which is a good indicator of the fact that they don't feel that this market is necessarily flooded. Again, it's more than we'd like to see, but it's not as heavily weighted as other parts of the nation suffering from those problems at a much greater